Welcome everyone to our calendar year end closing. The first thing we want to remind everyone is when you call, we do have a direct number that rings the 3 on the fiscal team. That is on our website. We also have it here. You can also call the 345-3400 and one of us will pick it up. But if you want to bypass someone else answering first and then having to put you on hold so that we can pick you up, then you can call our team directly. And then reminder to use the team email and create a help desk. That way, if I'm on vacation and you send an email to me, you aren't waiting, because if I forget to put my out of office on, which I sometimes do forget to put my out of office on, you don't know that I might be out of the office for a day or two. So that is a nice reminder to send a team email rather than emailing any one person individually. And so we're going to hop right in with EMIS updates. All of you are probably pulling your hair out because of the staff reporting is open and your EMIS coordinator is probably bugging you on staff data and giving you reports and having you look at stuff. And couple of reminders, all of the statistics for the local report card for staff, except for the attendance percentage, is taken from the staff course collection. So it's very important in this collection that you have all of your staff in with, make sure that you have incremented the year's experience, make sure that you have updated everyone's degrees and semester hours. And well, why does all of that matter? There are statistics on the report card that says percent of inexperienced staff, less than 5 years experience, percent of staff that doesn't have a master's degree. And there are statistics on your report card that are taken from these elements that, if you do not have them updated accurately, can impact your district report card. Does it impact funding? No, but in the grand scheme of things, it impacts the things that the public sees. And if some of this stuff is forgotten, then they may look at the report card and it's like, I don't want my child to go to that district. Only 5% of their staff has more than 5 years experience. So it's important that you do update everything. I've sent out the checklist, and so everything should be out there for you. If you have any questions, especially on the mass changes, for those of you on redesign, if you run into issues on doing the advanced filter for the mass changing on experience, incrementing years experience, one of the keys is to double click your item to pull over to the advanced filter area rather than drag and drop. For whatever reason, drag and drop breaks it, but if you double click, it will work correctly. The other thing, you might get an error on it that it won't work when you go to do the mass change, the mass increment. And what I've found is if there is anyone in the authorized years experience column that has 0 or has a blank, then that will cause it to not work correctly. So contact me. I will work with you on how we can change the filters so that that will work. A couple other things. Let's see, verify that all of your staff is accurate for the current year, that you have all of your new people marked. And reminder, there's 3 screens. There is the employee screen, there is the position screen, and there is the compensation record. And then this last point here, this is something that they said in one of the last statewide EMIS trainings. If you have someone leave mid-year or come mid-year, you've always done it. Coming mid-year is fine on the contract amount because you put the contract amount, the amount that that person would make if they were in that position for the time of the year that they were employed. But when we have you modify a record to pay off an employee, I know our recent instructions on redesign, we have not said to change the contract amount to basically be the total amount that they would have earned for the time period they were employed. But that's what we've got to do, either on the compensation record or put that amount on the position in the EMIS override fields. One other thing is, and I don't think I have this on my step. I don't. On your mid-year contract changes, the contract amount is correct, coming from the compensation record. But the way that the mid-year contract changes work in redesign, the work days are not your complete work days, they're the work days remaining. So if that is not your complete work days on the compensation record, then you will need to go to the position record and put in the total work days for that person in the EMIS override work days field. And also the previous compensation that they were paid under, that they're no longer paid under, will need to be unchecked, report to EMIS. Each compensation record that is marked as report to EMIS will get pulled over as a separate position. And so you may have employees that are being reported with 2 FTE and it won't throw out an error unless you are specifically looking at the staff employment record file out of the data collector and see that all of your people are being reported with 2 FTE. It doesn't generate an error until you get that third compensation record on that position, which bumps them greater than 2 FTE. So that is something to keep in mind and to look at when you're looking at your reports, and to run the reports, all of the EMIS reports that are in the documentation, the active compensation records, the inactive compensation records, the ones that are marked as report to EMIS, make sure that everything is updated accurately. And the first collection closes on January 28th. So it's helpful to have as much of your errors fixed by then. Well, what if I don't get them all done by then? That's okay. But all of the report card measures will be taken from the first collection, and the TLC report, the teacher license or certification report of who is certified to teach classes, is taken from that collection and from that date. But you still, if you find changes afterwards, you need to make those changes before the end of the year. Any questions on EMIS? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Jake.
Okay, so updating current fiscal projects. We'll start off with a little kiosk discussion. The timesheet module is available. If anyone's interested, please contact us for more information on that. Also, at our last payroll meeting, Carrie discussed several changes that were coming to the kiosk. We just recently were informed that this is expected to happen in mid-December. So we'll keep you up to date when that happens and maybe send you guys out a review of what those changes are so that you can be prepared for those. No one from EFP is here, but if they choose to listen in for this recording, the big thing that we wanted to relay to you is that we are investigating some ippy-dippy replacements. So we'll try to keep you up to date on what we find on those. For redesign, we just wanted to kind of give you an update of what has progressed in the last year. You'll see that 2021 was a big year, and if you are on redesign, at least 600 other districts are as well. So anything you're encountering, they have encountered as well. So Wave 8 is now all live. So congratulations to all of you. As far as we can tell, everyone's doing just fine. Wave 9 is scheduled to have a kickoff meeting in a couple weeks, and then training in late January. So you'll be hearing more from us for you districts who are getting ready to migrate next. And those will be paralleling in February, March, and April. And we'll talk to you more about maybe some specific dates and put together a more specific schedule at our kickoff meeting in a couple weeks. So we've recently talked about the new employee onboarding module. Several districts have reached out to have that installed. If any of the other districts that wish to try that out, want that installed, please let us know. You can send me or the team an email, and we can schedule a time to get that installed for you. So just let us know on that. Recently, we have modified the LACA direct deposit notice to add the new W-4 information at the bottom of the notice. As of right now, the way we can display it, it will display the new W-4, but it also is going to display the old W-4. We're working on a solution to try to make that only display what is applicable to the employee. We've got an idea, but it's not perfected yet. So we'll keep working on that and kind of update that form if we can figure that out. But
it's just
yeah, that's just on the redesign form. There's not a way of putting the new stuff on the classic form. So, so that's just redesign. So we've also had some questions recently about people questioning their direct deposit notices, and the board amounts are not displaying. This was a change in late August where the system actually referred back to the payroll item configuration setting, and it was corrected so that you now have to have the box for print employer amount checked in order for those board amounts to display on the direct deposit notice. So if you have any questions with that, let us know. But if you want those board amounts displayed on your notices, you do need to go into payroll item configuration and check the print employer amount box for those payroll items to display. So that kind of wraps up the software discussion. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask before we kind of move ahead?
I'm just kind of curious about the timesheet function for kiosks. I guess how does that work with, you have to have a kiosk login to be able to go in, put in your time.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
so the question in the room is about the kiosk timesheet module. the employee would already have access to the kiosk if they're accessing their pay stubs, W-2s, leave requests, would be the same login. And then we don't have anybody live on it, but I envision it's probably very similar to how you have that app drop-down box that you can flip between kiosk and Nippy. I really think, you would just have a timesheet area that you would go to, you could enter your timesheet. We are told that if you are using the leave portion of kiosk, that kind of pre-populates onto the employee's timesheet. So if they have a sick day today, it's going to be there. They don't have to remember that or put it in 2 places. So when they go to do their timesheets, some of it's kind of pre-populated. There's a lot of setup involved. It's my understanding where I think you have to go like define everybody's shift, so it knows what to expect. And there's some really, I will say pickiness, if I can make up a word, but where if somebody has a job description or position description of aide and somebody else is teacher aide and somebody else is educational aide and somebody else is abbreviated or misspelled, I think you have to clean all of that up in your payroll database first, because everything is driven by that. So we haven't had a district actually go down that path entirely. We had one start it once, and that's been several years ago. So what I know is kind of based on that. It could have changed. But so if you want to go into that, we would just reach out to Kiosk State Support and probably set up a Zoom session with them and us and you. Make sure we've seen a recent demo and then get the up-to-date, set up configuration steps and start working through those, because I really think that's almost the hardest part. Once you get all the setup done, I think it's pretty, easy, it seems. I don't think Kiosk State Support ever says they get a lot of questions or tickets about it, except on the setup part. Once it's up and running, it's pretty self-sufficient, and it is a true time sheet, not time clock. Like the employee's gonna log in after the fact and say, I worked Monday 8 to 4, I worked Tuesday 8 to 4, I worked Wednesday 8 to 3. But it's not like logging actual time. It's just them submitting a timesheet sheet electronically instead of paper.
So for substitutes, we would somehow,
If
would
you,
that be an option? We would have to just set them up.
if you want them to
Email or
submit,
something?
right, they would have to have a kiosk account, which doesn't require school email. It just requires an email address in their payroll that then they use to log into kiosk. So it would be up to you if that's a school email or a personal email. But you'd have to make sure they get registered. And there's a setting in kiosk where we determine, should your inactive jobs display or not. So we might have to change some things to get those subs able to log in and get working, but that would be an option.
And can you export the information then directly into payroll?
I do believe so. I mean, I really think it's been a long time since we saw it, but I really think it probably works similar to the exporting of leave, that there's probably, a similar functionality. Other questions?
This is Sophie. I have a question. It's not regarding the stuff that we've talked about already this morning, but we need to pull information for our ACA report. And I was wondering if there's a report out there already that has this information that we need.
Okay, so the question that I heard, I think it's Sophie asking about an ACA report.
Great.
So in redesign, there is a forward report. If you go to the reports menu, I think it's listed on there called a forward. So it's very
Okay.
similar to the classic one. If you used the classic afford report,
Okay, is that the same report we would need for our, this is for the insurance information? Our short answers.
oh, maybe are you, instead of me thinking of forward, are you instead thinking of like the 1095B, 1095C, that
Yes,
sort of thing?
yes. Yes,
So the redesign or classic, neither of them truly create those forms, but the afford report can be used to export the information and provide to a third-party vendor, or then for you to manipulate, like you can send it to a CSV and you can manipulate it to populate those forms. But a lot of our districts are contracted with like American Fidelity or somebody where they send the afford CSV to them and then they create those forms.
Okay,
but the software doesn't truly create them.
I didn't know if there was a report out there already set up that we
I would-
could get this information.
I would first look at a forward report on the reports menu. And if that does not give you what you want, there are 2 other reports or 1 other report that I think we have seen another district create and use that we could probably copy into your report manager. But the other 1 or 2 reports that I'm thinking of are more, I think, geared towards American Fidelity and information that they needed to get their program up and running, but that still might help you if you're having to do those forms manually. Have you always done those forms manually?
No, we don't do the forms ourselves, but we have to send this information like their first name, last name, social security number, date of birth, date of hire and address that.
So
And
start
then,
with the Ford report, and then I bet with that demographic information, there is another report that we'll have to copy into report manager. So
okay,
I will write that down and we will look at that this afternoon.
okay, thank you.
I want to make one more comment about the printing the board share of payroll items on the check stubs. I actually got a phone call from a superintendent, and I'm not going to name districts to protect the innocent. And he was asking me, why did this one check stub, it was there, and the next check stub, it wasn't, and what changed and why not? And boards would want their employees to see the employee share so they can see, oh, it's not just costing them $79 for insurance to pay, it's costing the board $654 in addition to the employee $79, and those are bogus numbers. And so if you have not gone in and marked your payroll items so that things like your insurance and show up the board share on your direct deposit or your pay stubs, talk with your treasurer, talk with your district, make sure if they want them to show, unless you specifically had it marked in Classic as no, in Classic it did show. And until we did make the change recently, the software had previously included them, but when they made the change recently to go off the flag on the payroll item configuration, it was, if it was not a no, it was putting it on there. So that is something that, don't just assume that, oh, I don't have to do anything. I would suggest that you do talk with your district and make sure if they do want that on there, talk with your treasurer and possibly superintendent and make sure if they want those on there, especially if they were on there previously.
Will they be displayed with an asterisk like they were before?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, upcoming meetings. We will open up a lab if anyone here wants to get any, do any work here. We'll have a lab open after the meeting today. We'll open up a Zoom session from 1 to 2 today also for anyone that has any questions of anything they heard today or wants to get a head start and has needs some help. Next week, we'll have our fiscal advisory meeting with treasurers and the accounting calendar year-end review. On the 14th, we will do a redesign advanced reports training. And on the 15th, we'll have our next wave redesign migration kickoff meeting. I have put all those on the LACA calendar, as well as some other dates. So, keep that in mind as you create your schedules going forward. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie to start discussing the closing checklist.
If I talk too long today, just yell at me because I forgot my watch. So. So the PowerPoint kind of just sends you to the LACA page for the checklist. Starting probably last year, we started teaching from the checklist instead of teaching from the PowerPoint and making you guys worry about more than one thing. So I'm gonna swap here and try to pull up our checklists. And does everybody on Zoom see that I have picked checklists now instead of the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, so I have the classic checklist on the left, redesign checklist on the right. We're just gonna go through the checklist side by side. So if you're on classic, we did rearrange the order of these checklists to get them in the same order. So as for the most part, so as we talk about concepts, they'll apply to both. Just keep an eye on the checklist that applies to you. The first page is kind of that actual check sheet that you can use, and it gives those page numbers in this super long document of where you find the applicable step. But then to get started, we did send these out yesterday, and Carrie's really picky and made a few more changes to them since I sent them out, and Jake might have already put updated copies on the website. Yes, so there, but I also, just for the time being, and maybe the website copies have them too, there's highlighting in a few spots where, that changes that might actually really matter to you. Other than that, like I found a typo, something silly, that really doesn't matter, but so we'll talk about the things that changed and ask you to jot that down. So the first thing that you can do to get ready for calendar year end is to verify social security numbers. This is optional, but a lot of you do it. In Classic, there's an extract program on the W-2 menu, the SSA EVS program that creates a file, and you upload that to the SSA Business Services Online. You get a return file, you transfer that into Reflections, and you get your error report. So if you have a social security number typed in incorrectly, or somebody's changed their name because they got married and you didn't know about that. In the redesign, there isn't quite yet an extract program that is in the format that is accepted by Business Services Online. So as a workaround, while they are working on that issue, which that issue has to be prioritized by the prioritization committee, so it's not on the schedule for this year, at least. So at least for this year, if you want to do something similar, you could go to the core employee grid, filter on your employees who were hired January 1st of this year or after, and then log into the Business Services Online account and verify them manually, which I believe you have to type in first name, last name, social security number, birth date, and gender. And it'll tell you then instantly if that's correct or if you have something incorrect. That won't catch 100% of issues that you could encounter, because it won't catch the people who were hired 5 years ago and changed their name because they got married. But it'll still make sure you didn't key in a social security number wrong as you entered your information on a new hire. So that is a good step to do, just to make sure we don't have issues trying to submit your W-2s when you get to that point. So the next thing that you can do is start verifying in Classic your dead name records, or in Redesign your payroll item configuration records. So in Classic, you can run a report on the USPS DAT menu, the dead name report, to see all of your deductions and look at them. Or you can run it by a certain code to just see the school district ones when we're talking about school districts, or cities to talk about cities. There isn't really the same report in Redesign, but if you are somebody who likes to work from that report, In redesign, you're hopefully comfortable with your grids, so you could go to the payroll item configuration grid, use that more button, add columns to your grid and see all these pertinent fields right in your grid and not have to view every record. So the redesign is a little bit more interactive, so just keep that in mind as we talk through these, that you might want to use your more button, customize your grid, and do some filters if you're in redesign. So the first thing to verify is on your school district records to make sure that you have the 4-digit school district code in the code field, and that in the W-2 abbreviation field, it is the 4-digit district code followed by the name, because the W-2 will display the W-2 abbreviation, but just the first like 6 characters. So you need to make sure that 4-digit code is first. This is nothing new. You've done this every year. But if you had new ones that you added, you know, those are definitely the ones to worry about. The next thing is thinking about your city records. So again, you can verify the W-2 abbreviations and make sure that they are as you wish for them to appear on somebody's W-2, keeping in mind that the W-2 has limited, you know, space. So it's really just going to display like those first 6 or so characters. So make sure that's descriptive to the employee. And if you ever used the city tax report in Classic, or would like to use the equivalent report that we created in redesign, instead of having to mail paper copies of W-2s, if you are still able to mail that report, or if you use that report to, you know, verify that you're printing off copies of W-2s and sending the correct list of employees to the different cities, then you want to verify in Classic that you have the vendor number on the city record, because that city tax report requires a vendor number. And in redesign, you want to make sure that the same payee, like the payees, are selected appropriately. So you could go ahead and run the city tax reports now, take a look at them, see if it, you know, breaks by city the way you would expect, or if something's jumbled up, then maybe you have some cleanup to do. Then we want you to verify your tax entity code on those city records. So in Classic, LACA can submit Newark, Whitehall, Delaware, and Columbus electronically for you, as long as you have the tax entity code in dead name, and it has to be this specific abbreviation, so that when we run our program, we say go look for anybody with the NEWRK for Newark or WHT for Whitehall and so forth. So go verify that those entity codes are correct in dead name. In redesign, this is slightly different this year than prior years. So the tax entity codes come over from Classic, and they're just those letter abbreviations up to 5 characters. Classic has a limit on that, redesign does not. So we had a redesign district have issues with their City of Columbus submission last year. The City of Columbus didn't want to see any WRK or WHT or DELWR in their file anywhere. They wanted to see all zeros filled in that submission file. So in redesign, we are suggesting you go change your tax entity codes to have 5 leading zeros followed by that abbreviation, with the exception of Columbus. If you were withholding Columbus city tax, instead of 5 zeros in that field in this big ugly file, they wanted to see 3 zeros and 2 8s. So that might be hard for you guys to pick up on, but Columbus has 3 zeros and 2 8s before it. So that will be everybody changing tax entity codes in redesign. We can't do that in Classic because Classic is limited on the number of fields we have, or the number of characters we have to work with. But if you are a Classic district, I didn't change your checklist at all. We can't fix the tax entity code, but the next step, even though I didn't change it, you could go ahead and do it, what we talk about next. So we only have 4 Classic districts left this calendar year: Tri-Valley, Maysville, Northridge, and SeaTech. If you guys have City of Columbus withholding, once I talk here about the RETA stuff and CCA stuff, I'll point out what you could do, but I didn't put it in your checklist. But the other one on the list that I guess if I scroll back up here, if you're noticing, if you're comparing the 2 side by side, Classic, we don't have Lancaster on the list, but on redesign, we do have Lancaster on the list. So I think Jody from Lancaster is on the call. She encountered last year that since she had more than 150 employees paying into the city of Lancaster, she had to do an electronic submission. Most of you don't have 150 or more employees. Definitely on the classic, we looked at those four. You guys, if you have Lancaster withholding at all, you have like 1 or 2 employees. So you can continue to do what you've always done with Lancaster and file that on paper or whatever. And in redesign, similarly, we have a little asterisk here in this chart because it's optional if you have fewer than 150 Lancaster withholding employees. So you can set it up to do it electronically if you want, and in redesign, or if you have fewer than the 150, you can still do the way you're always used to. If you do the electronic way, you have to have like an electronic login to Lancaster to upload. So it's not just software changes, it's also thinking about how you're actually going to get it to them. So hopefully that makes sense. That's a little bit of a change this year, just from what we learned with submissions last year, what we encountered. And then I do have, okay, so this bullet here on the redesign side, update the abbreviation for city tax records to show the full city name. So in redesign payroll item configuration, there's a field code abbreviation. There's also a field code W2 abbreviation, talking about just abbreviation. If you have that abbreviated like NEWRK, go ahead and spell out Newark. Go ahead and make that be the full name. Classic, we're limited. You can't really fix that. But that is something that Columbus wanted for those electronic submissions, for you to spell out the whole name. So that's why that step is new this year. And then the next step, part of this step is the typical step from prior years where we're getting ready for the RETA and the CCA submissions. But then there's a little bit of new stuff tucked in here. And again, it's because Columbus got picky. So where Columbus got picky, I only put it on the redesign side, but this is somewhere where the classic side could go ahead and get a head start on this too, so that when you get in redesign for next year, you could have part of this stuff done, because these fields actually would accept this. Okay, so for RETA and CCA and possibly a little bit of cleanup for Columbus, we want you to verify on those city records in dead name or in payroll item configuration, the tax entity code, the RETA 3-digit code, the CCA 3-digit code, or the RETA or CCA description. So on classic, we have screenshots here of each, option. On redesign, we took some screenshots and stuck them in there. So talking about classic, I'm sorry, am I losing anybody jumping back and forth? We okay? Okay. So classic, the RETA has the 3-digit code, the yes, and the city name. You also could do the new comment from the redesign checklist where you could populate this tax entity code, which is going to be an R0 followed by this 3-digit code that you already know right here. And then CCA, whether you find the city in Appendix A of CCA's website or Appendix B of CCA's website, you'll do one difference, either of them, you'll do the 3-digit code and the city name. But if they're in Appendix A, you'll have a yes in this field. And if they're in Appendix B, you'll have a no in that field. So the new part from redesign, you could also go ahead and populate tax entity codes on these, which we've never done before. And those tax entity codes for CCA will be CC followed by the 3-digit code. So that's previously just been an empty field. You could go ahead and start populating it to get a head start. If they are a non-RETA or non-CCA city, then you want to make sure you have the city name. And if you don't, it'll pull the W2 abbreviation. So here's where you could plug in the city names. If you don't have those filled out, it'll pull this W2 abbreviation. And we have a document on the website that'll take you to the CCA website and the RETA website, looking up those 3-digit codes. You probably already have them, unless you had somebody new this year, or if not to single anybody out, but Karen from Looking Valley probably has a lot of work because this may not have been anything we imported. Yours might be blank slate. So thinking about the redesign side of things, especially for that, in payroll item configuration, you're going to verify those same fields and the tax entity code is the new one. We haven't talked about that on Rita and CCA in the past, but that's because of the city of Columbus, that you want that same 3-digit code that you're putting in the Rita field or the CCA field. You want that same 3-digit code as part of a code. So for Rita, it's R0, the 3-digit code. For CCA, it's CC, 3-digit code. Then you have the 3-digit code. Then you have the city name. And then CCA has what we saw in Classic, that yes, no field is a checkbox. So checked is yes, unchecked is no. So we kind of said, you know, the same things as in Classic. If it's Rita, here are the fields you need to fill out. If it's CCA Appendix A, here are the fields you need to fill out. If it's CCA Appendix B, we don't have a screenshot, but the only difference is the report to CCA would be not checked. And then for non-Rita, non-CCA cities, put the city names in the CCA description field and put 6 zeros. No, I can't count, 5 zeros in that tax entity code field. So, and sorry for these changes, but this will cause, even though only one of our redesign districts got picked on last year, everybody might if we don't clean this up. So, and once we clean it up this year, then it'll hopefully just be, you know, smooth sailing in the future. So, questions on that? Okay, so there's a little blurb here in the redesign checklist that says, additionally, employees reported to Rita or CCA need to have the payroll item deduction type marked as employment or residence based. So this just appears a little later in the Classic checklist. It's something you have to do on both softwares, but it's going to either Classic's dead screen and making sure everybody's marked with an R if it's a residence-based withholding, or a C if it's an employment-based withholding, or in redesign going to the payroll item and making sure that the dropdown is picked as employment if it's work-based tax, or residence if it's the courtesy residence. So the next comment is about CCA being picky. I guess that's my word today, is picky. So some verification that you can do for CCA, but would probably also help encounter fewer issues on the W-2 submission entirely, because once in a while we do get a report back from the Social Security Administration that there's some sort of issue. So these are good guidelines to follow even if you don't have a CCA submission. To make sure that your employee names and suffixes and street addresses and everything are entered the way that the software accepts them. And by software, I mean like CCA software or the SSA software. So in Classic, you could use Safari to pull that information out into a spreadsheet to quickly glance down, see if you have anything wrong, fix it, and upload it back into USP Load. In redesign, you could go to the core employee grid and add those columns to your grid that you want to see. Click the report button, send it to Excel field names. And then it's uploadable and you can, you know, make your changes and mass load it back in. That might have been new last year. Okay, another thing you can do in dead name or payroll item configuration is make sure if you have an HSA account that it's set up appropriately. In Classic, that needs to have an annuity type of an I, and in redesign, that payroll item needs to have a type of health savings account and an annuity type of other. So that imported over fine. Like if you were Classic type I, that imported over fine. I know that seems a little different, but especially if you set up a new HSA this year, just take a look at that. And then also while you're in dead screen or payroll item configuration grid, you can verify that all of your annuity records are set up with the correct annuity type. So your 403Bs are marked as such, 457s are marked as such. Redesign, I know it's hard and sometimes you click that eyeball and it's light, so you hit edit so you can see it a little better. You know, make sure you don't save changes accidentally. Classic, we had a lot of people accidentally make changes because they thought in order to get down to this annuity type field, you had to be in modify mode, and you don't. You can arrow down to that field and hit F7. So just make sure you don't accidentally make a change while you're reviewing We unfortunately have had people mess up their W-2s doing that. And then my employer health coverage, did I skip that in the redesign checklist?
You have it under step 3.
Oh, I see it right here.
Right above step 3.
Gotcha.
I just saw that.
Thank you. Okay, so employer-sponsored healthcare, classic in dead name, make sure that yes, no question is answered appropriately. If you have a standalone vision, dental, life insurance plan, those are not health insurance. HSA contributions, the amounts that employees withheld to stick into an account, those are not employer-sponsored healthcare. It's really just like your medical plan. So make sure those are marked correctly so they appear on the W-2 correctly. And same sort of thought in redesign.
I understand why you did it because there's kind of 2 parts. There's the payroll item config, and then there's the.
But I don't know that we say payroll item config here. Okay, so you could still go to payroll item configuration and redesign and verify that include as employer sponsored healthcare coverage is marked correctly. It's a checkbox in redesign. I tell Mary and Jake every time I look at this, I find something that I'm picky about. So I'm making myself a note.
Under option 1, let's talk about.
Okay. So if all healthcare payroll item configurations have the employer health coverage boxes checked, then it works. You just want to make sure those are marked correctly, especially if you switched from like Anthem to United Healthcare this year and set up a new deduction. Make sure you marked that new deduction or payroll item configuration correctly. Okay. So I'm probably more lost than you guys in my talking in circles. Okay. So now verifying deduction records on employees or payroll item records on employees. We've done the, dead name or payroll item configuration. Now it's thinking about dead screen or payroll items. So the employer health comment that's here is saying if somebody paid for their health insurance outside of payroll, so they were off on leave and they had to write you a check, or you forgot to collect the board amount of health insurance through payroll and the board just picked it up on the accounting side when you cut the check. Anything that didn't run through payroll, you need to get into payroll in order for it to show on the W-2. So in Classic, there is an employer health field on the 001 federal deduction that you need to enter the grand total for the whole year, everything that happened in payroll plus everything that happened outside of payroll, employee amount plus board amount. You enter that grand total that you want to appear on the W-2 in that box. On the redesign side, instead of thinking about the whole year, the redesign side, you only have to think about what happened outside of payroll. The redesign is going to look at what happened in payroll and add to it whatever you enter as an adjustment. So if you had somebody write you one check and that's all that happened outside of payroll, you need to go to core adjustments and add an adjustment just for the amount of that check. Or if you didn't enter or get that board amount withheld through payroll, go enter an adjustment for that board amount. And you're doing that under core adjustments and selecting the federal 001 record and selecting a type of health insurance. So Classic, if you enter anything in the Classic field, it overwrites and ignores what happened in payroll and just picks up that one new number. Redesign still pays attention to what happened in payroll. So that's kind of a different concept, but.
Carrie, I have a quick question on that.
Yep.
So we had a teacher who came on our insurance because her husband retired. So she paid for her first month that she was behind by check. Would I need to do that for her? Or is that just people who are on leave and they're paying for their insurance out of pocket? She paid for just the employee side.
You would do that for her too. So my example was just the on leave. Anything that happened outside of payroll needs to be entered this way to get it on the W-2. So you want her W-2 to show that she spent that money on healthcare. So you have to do an adjustment for that amount.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. There are further comments in the checklist. If you have to do this on a lot of people, that you can do it through like mass uploads. Hopefully you guys don't have to do it on a lot of people. And then there's an item there for you to do what is needed for health reimbursement arrangements that are for small employers of 50 or fewer employees who only offer the qualified HRA and don't offer group health insurance. So I really don't think that applies to anybody, but if that somehow applies to you and you want to talk that through, you can call us. The instructions are there, but I don't think we've had any LACA districts need to deal with that in the past. Then on the classic checklist, here's that verifying of the employment-based versus residence-based code that we talked about earlier because it was earlier in the redesign checklist. And especially when you're thinking about any of these items on payroll items or dead screen, don't go through dead screen one by one. Don't go through payroll items one by one. Use your grid and redesign to pull everybody up in the grid and be able to glance down through it or to send it to Excel and glance down through it. And in Classic, remember that Safari will get that out into Excel so you can review it very quickly. So, and that would apply to like this next topic, the pension plan flag. We ask you to verify the pension plan flag on everybody's dead screen or everybody's payroll item and make sure that that's filled out correctly. The automatic option is the safest way. So if it sees retirement, it's going to check the box. If it doesn't see retirement, it's not going to. But some of you have them set up as yes or no. So just make sure you have that set the way that you want it. So the box on the W-2 gets checked correctly. And then if you have any taxable benefits of employee expense reimbursements that you would like on the W-2, then there are instructions here to do that. The classic directions are really in a document on the LACA website. So anything that we refer to the LACA website here, you have like a dozen or so supporting documents on the LACA website that you might want to go find if this applies to you. And the redesign, we spelled it out a little better there, just directly in the checklist, that if this applies to you, you can go enter for adjustment for that taxable benefit. So the one example that's here, in the checklist is, maybe we don't really have. So an employee expense reimbursement that would be taxable might be mileage if it's non-accountable. So the classic checklist says accountable versus non-accountable. So do you do a mileage reimbursement only if they turn in, I drove from point A to point B and it was this many miles? Or do you just give somebody a mileage allowance of $100 a month? So a mileage allowance without being accountable would be taxable and would have to get on the W-2 in some way, shape, or form. Maybe you're already paying that through payroll, so maybe you don't have to worry about it. But if you did anything like that through accounting, you have to think about it. If it is a taxable benefit, this would be how you get it on the W-2. The other option is to, like in redesign, run it through payroll. So the adjustment option works, but there's also where you can enter an amount in your current or future payroll. So moving expenses. A few years ago, this changed, so it only applies to active duty members of the armed forces. So I doubt this applies to many either, but if you reimbursed any moving expenses, then in Classic, you need to enter that in the moving expense field on the federal 001 dead screen. And in redesign, you need to enter a core adjustment on the federal record, selecting moving expenses for that amount that you paid. Then there are fringe benefits. If you have fringe benefits that need to get on a W-2, for example, tuition reimbursement, if you paid more than $5,250 to a single employee during the calendar year, that becomes a fringe benefit, the amount over $5,250. So if you need to do that, there is a lot of manual adjustment that you need to make in Classic to all of those dead screens. So we refer you to a document to make sure you're correcting the correct fields. You also have to withhold the employee amount of Medicare and the employer amount of Medicare and remit that amount. And in redesign, Instead of going and manually modifying a payroll item record, you do that through core adjustments. So you're going to do a core adjustment to the federal record. You're going to do a core adjustment to Medicare record and a core adjustment to any of those city or LSTI records that are impacted. And again, you need to withhold the amount of Medicare for the employee and employer. This is one of those changes that we did make. The instructions were here. We just kind of reorganized them. In the copy you're looking at, it says, enter the amount owed for employee and employer for fringe benefits. But since you're picking that this is the amount withheld is really just the employee amount. And then when you're ready to do the employer amount, you're going to pick board amount. So it's really two separate adjustments that you're entering. So we just kind of split that up to make a little more sense, hopefully. Questions so far? I guess if I scroll down, I will see that, I guess we're not done with this topic. You can, instead of doing it through adjustments and all of those manual modifications in Classic, or the adjustments and redesign, you can run that through payroll also. So that actually is a much easier way because it takes care of the Medicare withholding for you. And then that shows up on your next, filing of taxes and Medicare withholdings and makes it a lot easier. So if you do have a situation like that, try to think of that before your last pay of December and get that into payroll instead of the manual method. Then if you guys offer dependent care allowances, the dollar amount on that increased this year to 10,500, and anything over that amount would need to get reported on the W-2. So the system is going to have you enter the full amount, and then it knows what that limit is and puts the correct amount on the W-2 for you. So in Classic, you're going to do that on the federal record in the dependent care field. And in redesign, you're going to do that through core adjustments on the federal record, selecting dependent care. So both of them also have the option where instead of having to enter this, if you have that deduction set up in payroll as Classic, a DP care type, or in redesign, dependent care payroll item. So you would see that in dead name in Classic or in payroll item configuration in redesign. If you have that set up as that dependent care type, then you don't have to worry about this manual entry. Redesign, we have an extra bullet there that we really just never thought about in Classic. But if you see here on this screen in Classic, it has an adoption line on the federal record. So if this applies to you as a Classic district, you can deal with this too. So Classic, you would just enter the amount on this adoption line, and in redesign, if you had adoption assistance, you would enter it as a core adjustment on the federal record, selecting adoption assistance. If you provide a company vehicle to an employee and they're allowed to drive that home, so your, bus supervisor or a maintenance technician is able to drive a school truck home so that he can go plow somewhere, and just show up to work, and he's using that for personal use too, then that becomes taxable and reportable on the W-2. So you need to calculate the value of that needs to be reported on the W-2. And in Classic, you would enter that amount of that benefit in the vehicle line on the federal 001 record. And in redesign, you would enter an adjustment on the federal record selecting vehicle lease. And then we are up to third-party sick pay. So everybody gets those notices and grumbles. And is that third-party sick pay taxable or not? So if it is taxable, then in Classic, you need to make a lot of manual modifications. So we have a document out there to walk you through that. And most likely you'll have to withhold Medicare on that individual as well at that point in time, unless the third-party sick pay vendor did that for you. And in redesign, you'll do the core adjustment and increase that total gross and enter the amount that the third-party vendor reports to you on the form that they sent you, and then also do a second adjustment for the taxable gross. And there is a reminder here, just like I said on the classic side, if that third-party vendor did not withhold Medicare, you would have to withhold the Medicare then too. If it's non-taxable, it's a little simpler. So if it's non-taxable, then in classic, you will go to the federal 001 record and enter the amount that the vendor tells you in the third-party field. And in redesign, you go to core adjustment and enter an adjustment for third-party pay for the amount that they tell you. You don't have to do the Medicare withholding or any of the extra steps. And last year, we talked a lot about the COVID-19 amounts. If you paid an employee for leave that they took for themselves, for someone else, or for the emergency option. And this was extended at the beginning of the calendar year, I think through March 31st, that employers could still offer these leave payments. So if you did that at the beginning of calendar year 2021, you have to report that on the W-2 this year, just like you had to last year. So look back and see if you continue that into this calendar year. And if so, then in classic on the federal record, you have that COVID 1, 2, and 3 for the self, other, and emergency amount. And in redesign, you would go to the payroll item and click edit, and then there are fields there as well. So I doubt you guys will have a lot of this. I think most people use that pretty early on if they used it, but just look back at the beginning of the calendar year and see if you had anybody use that. So life insurance over 50,000. If it is board paid life insurance for an amount over 50,000, that is reportable. And there's a chart that we put here in your packet. We also refer to the IRS publication 15B, but we've compared this chart against that. So hopefully you don't really need to look there. But you're going to calculate the amount of coverage you provided that was over 50,000. So our example is 81,000. So 31,000 of that is taxable. For the number of months that you offer that coverage to the employee, our example is for 12 months. And then the number from this chart based on the employee's age as of the end of the year. So our example is the superintendent is 49 years old as of the end of the year. So there's a 15-cent factor. So 15 cents times 31 for the 31,000 and 12 months of the year. His would be $55.80. That would be taxable on his W-2. So if you do this calculation before you run your final payroll, then in classic, you can enter that as an NC1 in up to Cal future or up to Cal current, and it will withhold the Medicare and everything and increase the taxable amounts and take care of everything for you. Redesign, that is our option 2. You can do the same. You can do payroll payments current or future, picking an option of life insurance premium, enter that amount, $55.80 from our example, and run that through payroll. If you catch this after you've finished your final pay of December, then in classic, you need to make a lot of manual modifications. So we have that reference to that supporting document. And you'll also have to collect the Medicare employee and employer share. And in redesign, that's this option 1 that you would have to go do a core adjustment for life insurance. And you'd have to do a core adjustment for the Medicare since you're collecting that as well. So that's one that's much easier to do during payroll. So if you offer any board paid life insurance over 50,000, please look at that before you do your final pay of December. And then the final comment in this step is about life insurance purchased by an annuity. So if you have an annuity withholding for an employee and a portion of that is used to purchase life insurance, once it goes to that annuity company, they should send you a notice. And if they send you a notice, then there's a document on the classic website telling you how to deal with that. And in redesign, please just reach out to us. This is very rare. So we haven't had a redesign district have to go through that yet. So we'll just work with you one-on-one and figure out how that needs to be handled. Okay, so if you have any employees on active military duty, there are two options here, one for military differential pay and one for combat pay. I think in all my time here at LACA, we've had one district have to deal with this, so if this applies, just click these links, it'll walk you through calculating what portion is taxable, and then we can help you get that information onto the W-2 if needed. And the next step is to verify deceased employees. We've actually had a lot of questions on this recently, so there are some updated versions of documents on the LACA website that will be helpful. If you had an employee pass away at any time during the calendar year, hopefully you downloaded that document then and dealt with it then. But if not, think back, because we need to make sure that everything appears correctly on the W-2 and on a 1099. So for wages that were paid before the employee passed away, that information goes on the W-2. Any wages paid after the employee passed away go on a 1099. And that 1099 is going to be made out to the estate of the employee or to the employee's spouse. So you'll need to make sure you have everything set up in accounting to properly print that 1099 as well. So you'll be working with probably somebody else in your office to handle that. But if that affected you this year and you have any questions, let us know. So then before your first pay of December, which I don't know if anybody had a first pay of December tomorrow. So if you already did, maybe you haven't done this, but we just suggest you go ahead and balance your W-2 report before, just so you can clean up all of those errors as much as possible. So when you get to time crunch time, you already know what's going on, as few errors as possible. And then after that first pay of December, do the same thing. And then complete your final pay of December and print any reports, and then get ready for your month-end closing, which Mary is going to talk to you about. Are we good to keep going, or does anybody need a break? Okay, why don't we take a 5-minute break and we'll start back up at about 10:17.
Okay. Now we get to month-end closing. And so step number 10 is just reminding to make sure that you do your STRS hire, your STRS reg per pay reporting, your STRS month or STRS per pay, your STRS hire, transmitting all of that, sending your files to STRS and STRS. And then because it is the end of the month, we do have the STRS month and the STRS month. Those are required on Classic, especially the STRS month. The reports are available on redesign so that you can run them, but they are not a required part of the process, but you can run those, and they are found in the reports menu. And then balance your payroll account. And we have the detailed steps of where you need to go to do the different pieces and parts in redesign. For those of you that are new to redesign and have not balanced your month on payroll. So we have all of the steps spelled out. And balancing your payroll account, you may not have your bank statement to be able to fully balance your payroll account. We understand that. But as much of the year-end balancing that you can do prior to continuing on, especially for those of you that have early in the month payrolls, you're going to have to do your closing before the end of the month so that you can go on with a January 5th payroll. Balance your quarter report. Reminder on Classic, do not clear any totals. LACA will do that when you call us to finish your closing. But you do want to verify everything. And if you have differences in gross or between the calculated, the adjusted gross and the calculated adjusted gross, you want to verify those. There have been many of you who have had deceased employees this year. Each deceased employee adds to the mounting differences in those two figures. So as long as you have been able to document what those figures are and what those differences are, you should be good on following all of your balancing. We do have in here there is no clearing of quarter totals in redesign. And then step 13, balance your W-2 report. So most of you have elaborate spreadsheets. If you don't have an elaborate spreadsheet, at a minimum, you need to have a reconciliation worksheet that has each of your federal tax quarter payments. And so it comes up to a year-to-date amount, and then compare that to the W-2 report. But I know many of you have gone over and above and have some pretty fancy spreadsheets of how you enter all of your figures from every payroll item, from every payroll, and have some pretty nice balancing spreadsheets. So on Classic, here's a shot that shows where each of the amounts come from and what balances to what. And then how to balance to the quarter report. And then what items that you do need to balance. Balance the total gross from the federal, Ohio, and city deductions. And and then on the redesign side, we show you how to step-by-step where to go to create your output report. And then complete your balancing worksheet. And then step 14 is balancing the payroll item totals. Also on the Classic side, we have some common W-2 proc error messages and how to deal with those. A lot of the messages are the same on the redesign side. And so you can use that as a reference. I think there is a document that talks about what the common messages are and how to correct them. We have a link to the redesign document in the checklist. The only ones that I believe will cause your file to be rejected are Medicare fatal errors. So if you have errors on Medicare, those definitely need to be corrected. If you have the messages, the person didn't have OSDI taken out and they have an OSDI deduction, that's probably because they didn't have enough wages with the exemptions that they have and the type of OSDI that it is set up as. So that one can be fine and ignored. Some of your annuity ones, you will have messages on some of your deceased employees because of the manual adjustments that you have to make because of the amounts that you have to reduce off the one record in order to put that amounts on those amounts on the 1099. Step 14 is balancing your payroll items. Step 15 is balancing your ODJFS and submitting your ODJFS report. LACA will submit the ODJFS for the classic districts. And then once the remaining 4 districts are on redesign, you will be submitting your own ODJFS, and we'll have instructions on how you make sure that your account's created so that you can submit your ODJFS. For the 4 new districts that have migrated this fall, if you have not already verified that your account is created for ODJFS, please do that so that you can follow the instructions and do your submission through the ERIC website. And I think there's going to be some changes to this and a new website we have to go through, but I don't know all of the details on that. And then we get to calendar year-end processing. Complete your W-2 processing. So on the classic side, there's some questions you have to answer as you go through and process it. The first time, don't create the tape, and verify everything, make sure all of your errors are corrected. And then once all of your errors are corrected, then we want you to run the city tax report if you use that to submit to your cities. And then SSDT suggested that you go ahead and do a backup before creating the tape, because there are certain things that you need to do with the W-2s. If you have other states that you withhold for, the surrounding contiguous states have specific submission information, and those are for Michigan, Indiana, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Kentucky. I don't think any of you withhold for any of those states, but if you do, there are instructions on what to do for those. On the classic side, go to system configuration, W-2 configuration, and make sure that the box is checked that you are going to submit your own W-2 files and input the company name, location, address information, and the contact information. And make sure the box is checked. This is a big one. Make sure the box is checked for the submitter name and address, same as company name. And then make sure you hit save. My bad habit is I enter everything and then I hit the X. And that doesn't do a thing. And then generate your W-2 report and balance your W-2 report. And then go through, and there's certain tabs for each type of W-2 file you need to create. And the first one is for your main W-2 file. You create your print files, and then you create your submission files. And as you create each one of those, it will put those into the utilities file archives. Once you create your print files, and those are out there as an XML file, I can take that file and I can run it through the software I use to create your W-2 forms and print your W-2 forms for you. So you create your submission for the federal SSA. And then you generate the W-2 submission for the state of Ohio. And then you generate the W-2 submission for any of the additional states as applicable. And then you generate your CCA submission if applicable, your RETA submission if applicable, and then any of your city submissions. There is some additional research I need to do to see if there's some additional configuration files that may need to be done for some of your city submissions, such as Columbus, in order to get fields in the correct place. We got a release, I think it was the last release, that had some fields that we could customize for the city filings. And so I need to do some research to see if there's any setup I need to do. So those of you on redesign, before you do your city submissions, either look for an email from us or reach out if we have not sent an email to say, hey, is there any additional configuration that needs done before I create my city files? Right, and Carrie did mention that Columbus has not posted their 2021 W-2 submission specs yet, so we don't know if there's any changes to what they required last year. So we will keep an eye on that and keep checking to see if there are any additional changes to those items that they brought to our attention last year when one of the districts had an issue with their file that they submitted. So step 17 is a little bit different between classic and redesign because of the order of how things work. On classic, step 17 is run calendar CD. This has to be done prior to you calling us to finalize your closing. Because that will create all of your reports that will go out onto Bear. Once that is complete, then you can call us and we will do step 18. Now on the redesign side, step 17 is to contact us to do a backup. We will do this backup and we will archive it so that if there's any questions or any reason why you would need to go back to year end or be able to have us research something that was done at year end that we can't see by just changing the month back to December, then we will have that backup archive. So step 18 on classic then is to call LACA and we will do a backup of your files. We'll run quarter report to zero out your quarter to date and year to date totals. And then we will get all of your W-2 files for submitting to everywhere and for printing and all of that good stuff. And create your CDs, your files for change year, and do everything that we normally do at year end. And then on the redesign side, once you have everything done and you've done your backup, you can close the month of December. When you close the month of December, that will kick off a series of reports. Go to file, utilities, file archive, and watch that calendar year payroll reports file folder grow and make sure all of the reports have completed prior to making your month of January. You can open the month of January, but you can't make it current until all of your reports complete. Otherwise, I don't know if it will actually change values on the reports, but it may change report headers. So some of your year-end reports will say that they're January 22 reports, when in actuality, they are December of 21. And then we have complete post-closing steps. If you have any tax changes for any of your cities, those can be done. If you have any changes on OSDIs, if you have new OSDIs, all of those changes can be done after you've closed the month of December, and after LACA has called you and said that your closing is done on Classic, and then you can start on your next payroll. On Classic, once we have your W-2s printed, we will let everyone know, and actually this goes for everyone. Once we have the W-2s printed and folded and sealed, we will let everyone know that they are available for pickup. And then some of your post-closing processes are to go to do whatever your district has to do to generate all of your ACA forms, whether you have a third party that you work with that does that, and you have information you have to get to them. And then we have some common situations that may occur, and when you need to create a new W-2, or when you need to do a W-2C, and what you need to do for that. If at all possible, if you have someone you know is leaving the end of December, make sure you don't take out their January insurance. So you don't have to do a refund of deduction, and you don't have to do all of those adjustments. It's kind of ugly and messy, and gives you errors on your W-2 balancing if you have to do those refund of deductions in the next calendar year. So if you can make all of those adjustments in December, that is helpful to you. And that's the end of the Classic checklist. The last step on the payroll checklist is to actually do your W-2 submission. So we tell you where to go and get a copy of your reports or your files that you need to submit. And then step-by-step instructions on logging into the Social Security Administration website, doing the AccuWage, and then after the AccuWage comes back okay, actually uploading the file and submitting, and then submitting the file electronically to Ohio through Ohio Business Gateway. And then submitting your files to surrounding states, and then to CCA. It looks like CCA accepts a CD or okay. So, and these are instructions on how to do the CD for CCA. And then Rita will accept a electronic copy. You have to log into your account and submit your file that way. And then instructions on how to do Newark and Whitehall, Delaware, Columbus. So we have in Lancaster, we have all of the instructions of everything that we were able to verify. And don't forget, any other cities, you would need to remit paper copies. Are there any questions about any of this that any of you have? Are there any questions about anything that any of you have? Okay. And I forgot the most important part here. Jake had requested everyone send us your payroll schedule. And so based on the payroll schedule that you sent us, I created the this chart of when your last pay in December is, based on your pay date, when you would need to submit your direct deposit to the bank, and then based on your first pay of January and when your direct deposit is required to the bank for the first pay of January, when we anticipate that we have to have you closed by, and when you really need to call us by. Now, some of this has a lot of wiggle room in it because for redesigned districts, all we have to do is a backup, but we have to make sure that one of us is available to do the backup for you. There will be someone from LACA working every day except for December 24th and December 31st. But there might not be anyone after 2 o'clock. I don't know if there's any days. We're trying to have coverage from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. every day, but there might be 1 or 2 days that there may only be coverage until 2 o'clock. So if you would contact us late in the afternoon, we may not get your backup done until the next morning. And depending on the size of your districts, backups could take anywhere from 5 minutes to 25 minutes. So if you're flexible with us on time, we have in the past requested that you let us know what days your district office is going to be closed. And we use that as some of our information that we use to build this spreadsheet. I did not request that this year. So we have no idea if all of you are going to be closed because Christmas is on Saturday and you always got the day before Christmas Eve or Christmas Eve and Christmas off. So do you get the 23rd and the 24th off and the 30th and the 31st off? Or do you just get the 24th and the 31st since Christmas is on Saturday and New Year's is on Saturday? There's a lot of unknown variables for us. So if you see any glaring changes or errors in the information we have on here for your district, please let us know and we will tweak this accordingly. And of course, you can close earlier. We do recommend that you do not close prior to your last payday in December, because if there would be an issue that you would find on that, someone would bring in a check and say, oh, you really messed this up. And this has to be corrected. Well, this affects their taxes. So if there is an issue with their last pay of December, then it is best to get that corrected prior to the end of December, so you aren't having to have issues that affected this year's W-2 to be done in next year. So we do recommend that you do not close until after your payday. And I have a question in chat. When is a good date to have all of these steps completed? Okay, so Kristen, did I answer your question, or do you still have a question about that? Okay, great. So are there any other questions from anyone? If not, we'll have the Zoom open from 1 to 2 today. If anyone wants to hop on and have any questions about year-end closing and balancing and et cetera. And I'm sure we will talk to you, but have a wonderful Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Thank you.